Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Easily Chat. We've been showcasing teachers and some of the infographic projects they're doing in the classroom with students. Today, I have Jim Bentley, an award winning middle school teacher in the Elk Grove Unified School District in California and national faculty at the Buck Institute for Education. He's passionate about integrating subjects through the use of filmmaking and project based learning. You can follow Jim at curiosity_films, and you can catch the notes and his slides to this chat below and on our blog. He has a lot of great information, and I'm excited to share it with you. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, Jim, for being with us here at Easily and chatting a little bit more about how you're incorporating infographics in the classroom. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Dinah. I appreciate it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about why you chose to start using infographics in the classroom with your students and why it makes sense for what you're teaching in the classroom?
Well, for me, an infographics always going to be rooted in standards, and what I'm trying to get students to do is to think differently, to think critically. And I found that you can really tie an infographic well to, say, writing standards, also to thinking visually and interpreting visual images. So when you're blending visual and the written together, you can have some pretty critical, deep thinking happening.
Now, you have made quite a few connections, of course, between infographics and the English language arts standards. Can you walk us through a few of those?
Sure. Yeah. When you're reading history or social science or science even, or any curriculum area, it's all rooted in content literacy. So when you're thinking about reading and understanding text and then translating it into writing, it's a very easy connection to link science to, say, writing standards. For example, writing informative and explanatory text is a Common Core ELA standard, but it's also something that we see happening in, say, science classes, history, social science, government, economics classes as well. Kids are reading, they're learning, they're discussing, they're trying to convey ideas, and they're also trying to provide analysis based on that content area. So really, at the heart of it, we're all literacy teachers, whether we have a ELA classroom or not.
Yeah, that's really a great point because oftentimes people might think that these standards are in silos, of course, and really it's a great opportunity for teachers to collaborate across all the areas.
I totally agree. Now, I know that I'm in a sixth grade classroom, and you might have middle school or high school teachers that are wondering, how does this apply to me? One argument you might make is, would you want your ELA teacher to teach your students how to write a science-based essay, or do you, the science teacher, feel that you probably have some inside knowledge that might help science students write a science essay? Going along with that, when you're thinking about relating writing, it is a cross-curricular type skill. I see Common Core standards with literacy, organizing ideas, using strategies, also integrating and building in graphics into your writing. So charts, tables, even multimedia. So when I look at an infographic with charts and graphs, I think this is a great example of blending content area knowledge with writing knowledge with those graphical organizers and graphic pieces. Another standard, too, that I feel can be addressed with an infographic is really developing a topic. And I know that there's a lot of teachers who read students' writings and, they'll make notes in the margin saying, could you develop this? Could you explain more? Could you explain what you mean? An infographic is really one of those tools that really forces a person to know something and to develop it using both words and images in a really profound way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really forces a student to be so concise with what they're trying to say and not be long-winded.
Yeah, I know my first infographic that I built, I spent probably 5 to 7 hours over the course of a weekend just trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to really say. And when I boiled it down to translating it to students, ultimately it comes down to what do you know? What do you want to say? What are the words and ideas that you can use to say that succinctly? Which brings us to another Common Core standard of using vocabulary to inform or explain something. That's a Common Core standard as well that goes not only in ELA, but science and history, social science classes, or government, or whatever course you might teach.
Yeah, and all of those aspects are just so important for a student to know, regardless whether they're even building an infographic or not. That's definitely a good point.
Absolutely. So one of the things I know that we've been working with this year is trying to read nonfiction expository text in our sixth grade classroom, and then taking that information and translating it into a infographic that will be sort of a closing summary piece of analysis based on what we've been doing all year long. So I know this year we've been working with our city to create a series of short films, 7 films to educate businesses about organic recycling, landscape waste, wood waste, food waste, things like that. One of the things that we're tying that to is the idea of the creation of greenhouse gases and how organics generate greenhouse gas. So for this year-long project that we've been working on, we actually launched with an entry event where we were reading Newsella articles related to food waste. And we used a reading protocol, of course, to help with that, so that it's not just kids reading text and blindly answering quizzes. But this has really led to a very deep inquiry of organic waste and greenhouse gas waste. Ultimately, what we want to do by the end of this school year is to translate what we've learned in this project into an infographic, which we're going to be excited to share with you when they're done.
We're excited to see the end project.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of work. And that brings us to the idea of, how do you launch into an infographic? And my initial experiment with Easily was, figure out how it works at home before I bring it into my classroom. And I started kind of thinking about what are the essential components of a good infographic. And ultimately, students need something to guide them. And a rubric is a great way to do that. I actually have a rubric that I built for infographics using a template from Alice Keeler, whose teacher tech website is a goldmine for anybody using G Suite applications. So with a rubric, though, I would definitely share this with your students at the outset. Don't save it until the end of the project. It really gives students a chance to look at their infographic as they're building it, to evaluate it, to peer evaluate each other, and to give each other feedback. You could even get parents involved, too. So if you've got parents saying, how can I help my child? Show them your child's rubric, show them your child's infographic, and really have a conversation about, are we attending to these things? The written content, the images, the colors, are the shapes appropriate? Do the fonts work? Is the tone appropriate? If you're talking about organic waste, you want to think about colors or the overall appearance. I visualize food or farms, or I visualize garbage cans. So rubrics are fantastic.
Yeah, this seems like a really great tool, and I know that when someone is trying to build something, oftentimes you kind of don't know if you're going in the right direction, and especially so for students. So having this at their side and guiding them through it, I think would be very, very helpful.
Absolutely. And it also takes a lot of pressure off the teacher, too, because you can direct students back to that rubric to really help them understand, okay, this needs to be developed more, this needs some more refinement. So, when you're coming into the content that's written for an infographic, it's not just a matter of grabbing text and copying, pasting it. Really, I would focus on understanding what the content is first, really reading deeply, understanding, discussing. And part of that comes into the idea of close reading. If students just start off with a textbook and a few worksheets and they start building an infographic, I think what's going to happen for them is what happened for me, which is they're going to spend inordinate amounts of time trying to think, read, digest, and do the infographic all at the same time. There's going to be a lot of wasted time. So when students are given that task of build an infographic, they're instantly task oriented. But if they take the knowledge that they've been building and through close reading, for example, or discussion protocols, it's going to be a lot easier to build that infographic to start with. So I have here on this slide some information from Fisher and Fry and Ryan McCarthy on just what is close reading. And I know that's kind of a buzzword right now, and everybody's talking about it across content area. But I would really specify that when students are close reading, the end product should be, they should identify some key vocabulary, that central idea of the text, those compelling details, those claims that they've found or want to share with the world. Those are the things that really kind of are distilled out of a large body of text that are really ideal for sharing in an infographic.
The close reading, that's, as you said, it's a very popular thing, and everyone's taking a look at close reading right now across all areas, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's not enough to just read the chapter and answer a few questions. I mean, close reading really is reading for the gist. It's reading to understand what's being said on a surface level, but then it's also reading at a deeper level, a second or maybe even a third time for something very specific, usually with some sort of guiding question or essential question. I found, Fisher and Fry's work on close reading to be very helpful. And there's a couple of links there, Fisher and Fry and Ryan McCarthy as well, that viewers can go out and kind of do a little bit more research with as well.
Good. Now, you actually have some templates that you've created for your students for designing the infographic. So this comes after reading and after they've collected all of their content, correct?
Yeah, it's a Google Sheet that has a couple of pages to it. It's a bit of a beast to look at first, think, oh my gosh, so many things to work with. Building an infographics not a simple thing. It's very complex. So what I found is that when students jump into an infographic, sometimes they're very quick to turn to text and maybe a couple of simple images, and what you've got is this big, huge empty canvas with very little variety and very little interest to it. So one of the things I ask students to focus on as they're thinking about their thinking, as they're getting metacognitive in this process, is, what kind of images or colors or shapes would work? What kind of fonts? What's the tone that you want to achieve? Are you going for playful and silly? Or are you going for serious and earnest? What's the overall appearance? So this design template is pretty helpful in that respect. It's actually also a tool that I use to check in with to see where my students' thinking is in terms of how prepared are they really to jump into easily and go to work. When it comes to imagery on this template, you'll see there, you need to spend some time with it and kind of explore it. There are sections for, where you can put images or image ideas, links to those images so that you can double check those usage rights, where you definitely don't want kids going out to Google and just grabbing images and using them thinking they're all allowed for use. So being a good digital citizen is something that needs to happen as well. And with this template, you can actually curate those links.
So you have your students collecting all of the images that they may want to use. So even if they're just thinking about using it, you ask them to just put it in there and then maybe decide once they start designing what they choose to use. Okay. And then they're linking to all of the sources for the images and double checking that they can use it.
Right. Because ultimately, students are going to be giving feedback to each other. And as they're showing, hey, I want to use these images for this infographic with this central idea, students are able to give each other good feedback. And then when I'm meeting with them, I can also see the images that they're going for as well. So for example, with this, this food waste project that we've been working on all year long, I put a couple of sample images in. If you look and when you open up the template on the images side, you'll see a couple of pictures. One is a military food waste poster, and the other one's just a garbage can. That's kind of a canvas that I thought that kids could drag some of those images into so that they can actually see a quick thumbnail. But really what we want to do is we want to get kids, working, thinking, and getting feedback quickly. This template was a solution for that because, when you think about a kid jumping into an infographic and building it, and then they go to show it to somebody and they're emotionally invested in it, and all of a sudden people are saying, well, this doesn't work, or this doesn't make sense, or this font's a little bit off. It's like, oh no, I've poured my time and energy into this infographic, and they kind of marry it before they date it. So this is a dating process, this template really.
I like that analogy.
Yeah. Let's just play with the ideas first before we actually commit to them long term. What you'll see here, on the next slide then are, what kind of projects could you use an infographic for? And my answer would be anything. We've used infographics for history, social science projects. When we looked at, say, the Japanese internment in the United States, going to National Archives, we found almost 4,000 photographs that we could tap into. We've used infographics to showcase learning when it comes to basic math operations. We've even built infographics for other projects. I have an example of the QFT, the question formulation technique. This is an infographic that my students gave me feedback on as I was building it to kind of model the process. So really, the sky's the limit for how can you use an infographic.
Yeah, I really like that last example where you have created something yourself and you're letting students critique you on your infographic and what's working and what is not.
Oh yeah, no, they need to see the process modeled for them. And one of the things that we really stress in the class is that it's not about what's wrong, it's about what's missing, and it's not about improving, but it's about growing. So if something's not working, you might ask, well, why is that? Is there something missing, or does something need to be developed, or does something need to grow a little bit more? So, from an equity mindset, it's not about improving. It's about just, adding to what's missing. So, I value my students' feedback, and I know that I try to give them feedback that's valuable too.
So do you have any resources that you have used to learn a little bit more about infographics or incorporate it in the classroom? Anything that has helped you?
Yeah, since an infographic really is a literacy-based experience for me, I find that I keep looking for more information related to literacy, reading, close reading. Any book by Kylene Beers is a great book to read for close reading. Even YouTube, you can find videos on close reading on YouTube. For example, I've got a sample video here of Dr. Timothy Shanahan talking about close reading and what it means and what it is, which your viewers might find helpful. I found the 3.5-minute video was extremely informative to me as I first started learning about close reading.
Great. And, we'll certainly put links to that in our blog post so people can refer back to that video and some of your other suggestions if they want to take a deeper look into that.
Perfect. Yeah. No, there's so much to learn in the course of one career. So, any resources, that I can find or that I've found or have been passed on to me, I've greatly appreciated as well.
Okay, so how do you get your students to really focus on the message that they're trying to portray in their infographic before jumping into either a template or staring at a blank canvas?
Ultimately, it comes down to what is it that you want to say? What is the key message that you want to impart to somebody? If it's a summary technique, if you want to summarize something, an infographic may not be the tool that you want to use. Maybe you just want to do a written summary. So I kind of have to always get students thinking about what's the purpose of this? Why an infographic? I found that they're a great way to combine something that's interesting, engaging, graphic, in a graphical nature to words and ideas and concepts and thoughts. So really spending some time with exemplars, showing students what really works well. For example, I know we've got some exemplars that I pulled out that I've gone to use with my students for food waste. These are all professional grade infographics built by the United States Department of Agriculture, looking at food and nutrition, and they're colorful and they're bright and they're legible. These are things that we've spent quite a bit of time on evaluating, even using just parts of that rubric that I shared with you earlier.
Yeah, these are great examples, and it's a credible source so that they know that all of these were built professionally and designed and professionally researched. So I will be sure to put a link to this as well in our blog post. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. When you think about what it is that you want to say, then you have to think about the imagery that goes along with it. What images would most adequately or sufficiently support the message. You don't necessarily need to see dog and say dog, but, and that's kind of an old TV news thing, but, the words should support the imagery and the imagery should support the words as well. Using that template to work through with the colors and the shapes, shapes can really modify and enhance the look of something, separating words from the background and so forth, or even partitioning parts of an infographic to kind of direct the viewer's eye. Another thing that I stress with my students when we first start out in sixth grade is avoid ants on a page, which means avoid that look of an infographic that's huge with a few words and a lot of white space. White space is not engaging. Going along with that then is kind of a rule that I've come up with, which is a 3-to-1 rule of images to text. When you've got text on a page, there should be somehow 3 related images that go along with it. And those images could be, say, a shape or an image itself, or maybe a line or some sort of accent or flourish, something to really sort of enhance that visibility. And that's not a hard and fast rule, but that's kind of the ratio that my students and I kind of discovered over the course of this school year.
Yeah, I really like that ratio because that really kind of forces you to portray what you're trying to say visually as much as possible. And so, there are so many images that can portray a keyword or phrase that you're trying to portray in your infographic. So I really like that rule.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad that works. It's proved well for us so far this school year.
Yeah, I'm going to keep that in mind for my own designs.
Nice.
Good. Okay, well, we always have a ton of questions from our learning community and our educators, and I was just hoping that maybe we could ask you some of those questions and maybe get your perspectives on them. I know that depending on the teacher and what they're teaching and the type of students that you're working with, sometimes the perspectives can vary, but we're always interested in hearing what you have to say. So when you're actually working with Easly with your students, do you just kind of let your students play around and kind of figure it out on their own? Or do you provide them with guided instruction? I think we spoke about that a little bit earlier, but any tips that you might have for teachers who are interested in using Easly?
The first time that we actually opened up Easly as a whole group, there was no way I was going to jump in and start discussing and talking. Yes, let the kids play with it. I found that students will actually discover some things on their own that the teacher have not already discovered as well. So there has to be some play around time before you start out. And there's an old mantra I've heard, ABC, action before content. Sometimes you just need to let the kids try something out before they really do a deep dive into it.
Yeah, it almost kind of gives them some context before diving into the project and actually moving forward with getting something started.
Absolutely. And, they also have a chance to discover their own questions that they themselves want to answer for themselves. Just because I think something's important doesn't mean my students think it's important. They really want to know the things they want to know. So giving them a chance to explore and generate their own questions is a really important step in all teaching, I think.
You're using Easily as an end project. So you've been working on various lessons, of course, but the end project might be an infographic at the end of the school year. Is that correct?
Yeah, it can be both an end project, but also a formative project. I've used it both ways. What I'm finding is that if you're really going to build a great infographic, though, it takes a lot of time, and it almost seems like it makes a better summative type experience as compared to a formative type experience. Formative being, a test or a barometer of, where a kid's understanding is, or where their questions are. I've found that the more formative check-ins with, reflections and quick writes and exit tickets seem to be a little bit more efficient than, say, an infographic as a formative check-in. I thought originally that's how I would use it, but ultimately I'm seeing that it's more of a summative experience, and it really kind of showcases the end of a learning experience as compared to doing it midway.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we get teachers using it in all different ways, just for short lessons. Some are even using it for note taking. So, just wanted to get your perspective on what's working best for you on that. So that's great.
That's cool. Yeah. I hadn't thought about trying it as a note taking. I know we've used it for quick check-ins, say on a weekly basis for, certain math concepts. That actually works really well. For a year-long food waste project, though, it's it hasn't seemed to be as efficient. But going along with that too, I'd always, encourage any teacher who's going to use this to think about the why. Why do you want to use this? Do you want to use it to measure student understanding of a concept, or do you want to use it to showcase, a real profound learning moment? If you just need students to summarize something, you might want to just have them summarize something. I think it's a really good synthesis tool, ultimately.
Yeah, great to see that you're using it in different ways, and you've kind of found a way that kind of works with your students. So we have a groups feature, and this is an opportunity for teachers to have their students share content internally and privately, of course. Do you use the groups feature with your students?
Yes, we have, and love it quite a lot. It's kind of a nice way for me to be able to monitor student work as it's in progress. I can go to one spot, open up, I start dropping in and looking at where the infographics are in their state of completion. So that's been a huge help. And also then, like you said, it's private. It's not out in public domain or out in the wild world.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about any of your students' work getting out there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what is the Creative Commons process that you use with your students?
So when we're working with Easily Infographics now, since there's been a collaboration with Easily and Noun Project, it seems like the number of vector graphics you guys have just exploded. So we're doing this less and less. But ultimately, when we do find that we need to go outside and find an image or something that's very special or unique, we like to try and use the Creative Commons website quite a lot. We can filter for types of licenses, for reuse, for remixing, and so forth. So Creative Commons has been a really great tool for us. We can go through Google Images via Creative Commons, Wikimedia. There's even vector graphic sites on Creative Commons as well. So we're trying to be very conscientious about the idea that if you're grabbing an image or you're using a film clip or a screen grab, that the rights to it and that you're not inadvertently using someone else's intellectual property.
Yeah, and I'm glad that Easily, of course, has, all of those images available to your students, so it saves them time too. But we don't have access to everything, so of course those other images that students can upload, they definitely have to learn how to use that and find content that works and that they can use for their projects. So
absolutely. Another two other really great resources for images and video, to grab screen grabs, we found is the National Archives, of course, and the Internet Archive, two really high quality, huge treasure troves of images. So those are things I would suggest, especially to your history, social science teachers, or even some of your math or science teachers. It's kind of neat to find 1950s commercials or documents from the 1700s or images taken during NASA experiments in the 60s and 70s. Internet Archives, National Archives, they have a ton of resources out there as well.
I know there are so many great resources, and I've been kind of following the New York Public Library, and they've just released quite a few images that are just available and free to use. And I've been going through some of those, and those have been a lot of fun to go through. So,
I'll have to add that to my list. That's great.
yeah, I think that just recently happened. So, great resource. Okay, great. So you talked a little bit about the rubric that you share with your students in terms of grading the projects that your students create in the infographic. What are you looking for when you're grading?
Well, yeah, it's interesting when we talk about grades, versus feedback. I know the infographic rubric that I built using the template from Alex Keeler, you can actually change the weighting on that however you want to. From 100%, you can add 20% here, 30% there. So that's a really key thing. I typically try to make the effort to give a lot more feedback than I do grades. I would likely evaluate the entire infographic based on the different categories. I wouldn't imagine necessarily giving a one single letter grade for the overall thing, because sometimes maybe the imagery is stronger than the wording, or the wording stronger than the imagery, or perhaps you've got an issue with colors and tone, based on fonts. So ultimately, by the end of it, if I was really going to give a single letter grade, if I'm doing my job right and giving plenty of feedback and plenty of opportunities for students to give feedback, everybody ought to get an A.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like you've definitely have built out that process, that you have those checks in place along the way until the completion, that they should be able to correct or just improve
Yeah,
their infographic along the way, and they should be there by the end.
absolutely. Yeah, that's the goal. We want everybody to arrive at the same destination. Some will do it faster than others, which is going to require teachers to be a little flexible with how they schedule their work time and due dates and things like that. But with a rubric and a template like that, I think students know what the goal is and what they're aspiring toward. And with the right scaffolding and cognitive ramps, they can get there.
Awesome. Well, Jim, I think that's all the questions that I have for you. Any remaining tips that you want to give to teachers or last thoughts?
I'd say play with it before you try it with your students, and then even when you do that, expect to learn a lot from what your students show you that you didn't notice before. So be humble, keep an open mind. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it really is. And it's always a learning opportunity. I find that I'm always learning design tips. I have my eyes peeled for new things and new ways that I can use and easily. So definitely some good tips there. Okay. Well, thank you, Jim. And I'll be sharing links to all of the resources that you suggested on our blog post. And thank you so much, and good luck with the project.
Absolutely. And let's keep the conversation going via Twitter as well. I'd be happy to see infographics that people are building or share ones that my students are making. You can follow me on Twitter at curiosity_films.
Yes, absolutely. Again, you can follow Jim at curiosity_films. Jim, thanks again. It was a pleasure having you.